Joshua chapter 2, Rahab and the Spies, or we might say this is a chapter on how to act out one's faith, how to not only believe, but to stand on it. Let's go ahead and get started. Verse 1. Then Joshua, the son of Nun, sent 2 men as spies secretly from Shittim, saying, "Go view the land, especially Jericho." So they went and came into the house of a harlot whose name was Rahab and lodged there. Okay, what's going on here? Joshua sends 2 men up to reconnoiter the area around Jericho to measure their strengths and weaknesses. The house of the harlot was probably also an inn, because that was common in that time. And the men would have gone there because it was an excellent place to learn about what's going on in Jericho. Something is important here about Jericho and a lot of the other villages in this area at this time, especially in later chapters in Joshua where villages are being stoned flat right and left by Joshua and the Israelites. Jericho is an example of an ancient garrison, which was ruled by a tribal commander. There's no king there. It was not a village as we would think of it, as you can see on the screen. The majority of the people living there would have been soldiers, the troops and officers, along with the usual crowd that hangs around military installations even today. And this is where we're first introduced to Rahab in the Bible. So what do we have here? We have an inn that was basically gossip central for the village, or the garrison. It's a fort. We've been there, and it's not a very big place. Also, we have not only there, but the women and children, put quotation marks there, would have been the camp followers that follow military organizations everywhere in the world. These 2 spies are quite different from the group of 12 who went into Canaan to scout out the land for Moses way back in the day, about 40 years ago. Then the spies were handpicked to represent each tribe, and they didn't go to determine how to plan for battle. Far from it. Instead, they went because their leaders didn't trust in God, and they were afraid to go on into Canaan. They wanted to find out what's going on, and they were afraid. Joshua's 2 spies were not sent to do that. They were sent to collect information on how to attack. Therefore, attacking Jericho was a foregone conclusion. It was already decided. Joshua assumed that Jericho was the target and not one of the other places, and they were making plans for that. And they just needed to figure out the best way how to do it. Verse 2, it was told the king of Jericho, saying, "Behold, men from the sons of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land." And the king of Jericho, the commander of the fort, sent word to Rahab, saying, "Bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. It came about when it was about time to shut the gate at dark that the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, and you will overtake them." But she had brought them up to the roof and hidden them in the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued them on the road to the Jordan, to the fords, and as soon as those who were pursuing them had gone out, they shut the gate. Now this king, as I mentioned earlier, actually it's Melech in Hebrew, means military commander. And it's suspected that the Hebrew spies would be most likely to go to an inn to collect intel, and considering that Jericho wasn't a huge place, there weren't too many inns to check on. So he sends orders to Rahab to bring them out to be interrogated. He probably already had heard that they were there. Rahab says yes, they'd been there, but had left. And she lies again, saying that she didn't know where they were from, and explains that they had just left before the closing of the gate. So she says, "Hurry after them before they get away." And this all sounded reasonable to the soldiers, so they went out and chased after them. We learn that she knew all along who the spies were and had hidden them on the roof under a pile of flax. she had recognized right away who these two strangers were. And so she takes them up on the roof immediately. Now, the problem is somebody spotted them and ran out and told the commander. Verse 8. Now, before they lay down, that's the two men, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites, who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. When we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now, before I carry on here, I want to give some backstory here that's logical if you think about it. This garrison was on high alert. You can't hide 3 million people over on the other side of the river, especially when Jericho is elevated above the Jordan River. And when we were there, we sat out on a terrace at a restaurant in the middle of Jericho, and we could see back out to the Jordan River. We couldn't see the river itself because there were some trees and such, but we could see, just like around here when you see a long field or a meadow and there's a line of trees running through the middle of it, you know there's a waterway coursing through it. And so we could see there. So they up at Jericho, even though they didn't have telescopes and binoculars, they could still see there's a whole bunch of people on the other side of that river, and they knew exactly who they were. This is no surprise. And they were watching closely for any strangers to come along. They knew there would be spies wandering around. And so they were on high alert here. Rahab tells the spies an amazing thing, that the Canaanites were in abject terror of these Hebrews, since they had heard 40 years before about how their God had parted the Red Sea for them, and how they had defeated Og, king of Bashan, and Sihon, king of the Amorites. Rahab also makes a startling claim, considering that she's a Canaanite, that the Hebrew God is God in heaven and on earth, meaning that he was the God over everything that exists. At this time, there were gods in heaven and gods of earth, but there weren't any gods of the Babylonian religions or the Canaanite religions that ruled over both areas. And so by her recognizing that God, this is Yahweh, Jehovah, was the absolute God, she showed an understanding far beyond what other pagan people of that area believed. And in doing this, she was declaring that she believed the God of Israel to be the authority over her life. She knew that her life was in his hands, not the Hebrews, but in his hands, and so she wanted to be on the winning side. Verse 12. Now, therefore, please swear to me by the Lord, since I have kindly dealt with you, that you will deal kindly with my father's household, and give me a pledge of truth. And spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters with all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. So the men said to her, Our life for yours, if you do not tell this business of ours. And it shall come about when the Lord gives us the land that we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. Rahab knows which is the winning side in this situation, as I mentioned a moment ago, and she wants to join that side. But this isn't simply to save herself like that. She also realized who the real God is. She probably had noticed the difference between what the Hebrew God did for them and what her gods did for her, which was probably not much, if anything. Now, she makes a pact with these spies to protect them if they will protect her and her family when the Hebrews sack Jericho. And the men agree to do that once they have conquered Jericho. Verse 15. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall, so that she was living on the wall. She said to them, "Go to the hill country, so that the pursuers will not happen upon you, and hide yourselves there for 3 days until the pursuers return. Then afterward you may go on your way." Rahab uses a rope to let the men down outside the wall through a window, and tells them to go up into the mountains which were to the west. Their pursuers had probably gone east toward the Jordan, as previous verse had indicated, since the Israelites had camped on the east side of it. Now, these mountains rose quite steeply, they still do, by the way, still there, and contain many caves which would provide hiding places for them. Okay, here's a photograph I took while in Jericho back in 2018 on that church trip. And it's a partial view of the mountains from the ruins of Jericho. I was focusing my camera on the ruins themselves, which, as you can see here, looks sort of like a semi-organized big pile of dirt because it's so eroded, and many of it, parts of it, were made of just sun-baked brick and not real hardened oven-baked brick, so it crumbled quite rapidly. And now you see just this great big kind of orangey brown. The color doesn't show up well on the photograph here, but mostly kind of a brownish clay with here and there brick showing through to show that it had once upon a time been made of brick. Now you see the mountains in the background. If I had panned to the left, that would have shown you Jericho, but quite honestly, it wasn't much to look at. It's in Arab territory, and I'm sorry to say that it's very run down, like every other Arab territory we saw while we were there. And I'm not going to go into details of why, but simply a fact. Now, you see those mountains, and those hills, we didn't get close to them, but they're apparently pockmarked with caves, and the two spies had run straight west and climbed up into there and were able easily to hide 3 days, especially since the Jericho folks had gone out east to try to cut them off from crossing back over Jordan to deliver their information, and they hadn't gone there anyway. So let's carry on. Verse 17, the men said to her, "We shall be free from this oath to you, which you have made us swear, unless, when we come into the land, you tie this cord of scarlet thread in the window through which you let us down, and gather to yourself into the house your father and your mother and your brothers and all your father's household. It shall come about that anyone who goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be free. But anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head if a hand is laid on him. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be free from the oath which you have made us swear." She said, "According to your words, so be it." So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. Okay, the agreement between the two spies and Rahab is rather simple. Put this scarlet cord in the window so that when we're attacking, we'll know what to not destroy. And at this point, they didn't even know how they were going to do it. So they probably assumed they were just going to charge up somehow and take it. Of course, that wasn't God's plan at all. However, if any one of her family decided to go outside during the attack, they're going to get killed, and it would be their fault. Also, the spy said if she ratted them out, then these vows would be null and void. And to this, Rahab agrees, and she ties the scarlet cord in the window after they had gone. She's acting on her faith here. She's not saying, "I believe." She's, "I believe, and I'm going to go do it." Now, studying the commentators, I found that there's disagreement as to whether the rope and the scarlet cord were the same or they're different. And regardless of that, scarlet cord cannot help but bring to mind the blood marked on the doorposts in Egypt on that last curse that was coming down on Pharaoh back when Moses was fighting against him and arguing against him, so that the destroying angel would pass over and not kill the people inside. This scarlet cord would remind the Israelite soldiers to pass over Rahab and her family, but only if they stayed inside the inn, just as the people in Egypt, when they had the blood marked on the doorposts, they were not to step outside like that guy did in that old movie. They had to stay inside. Verse 22. They departed and came to the hill country and remained there for 3 days until the pursuers returned. Now the pursuers had sought them all along the road, but had not found them. Then the 2 men returned and came down from the hill country and crossed over and came to Joshua the son of Nun. And they related to him all that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "Surely the Lord has given all the land into our hands. Moreover, all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before us." Okay, verse 22 tells us here that the pursuers had gone down the road to the fords of the Jordan River, and of course, they hadn't gone that way, so they didn't find them. There are actually multiple fords there at the river, but they probably checked them all, and that took a while, but as we know, they didn't find them. The 2 spies returned after 3 days to their camp. They had to swim back across the river and explain to Joshua all that had happened. They're also certain that God had given the people of Jericho over to the Israelites. They were very confident, and they delivered a very positive message. Let's summarize. Rahab, a Canaanite prostitute and inn owner, is listed in Hebrews 11:31 as a hero of faith. Let's read that. By faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies in peace. Now we see here another example in the Old Testament of the fact that even during the time of Mosaic law, salvation still came through faith in God. From the very beginning with Adam and Eve, it was always through faith in God, Yahweh, just as it does now through faith in Christ Jesus. Okay, I want to focus on verse 24 for a moment and use that as a jumping off point. Why did God demand that they were to go in and kill everybody? And critics of the Bible have attacked God as a moral monster who commanded the slaughter of men, women, and children who were innocent of any crimes against the Israelites. Richard Dawkins, one of the atheists who has been especially attacking Christianity in the Old Testament for a few decades now, wrote this about this whole scene of Joshua and other parts of the Old Testament. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. That was in his book, God Delusion, in 2006. My goodness, with a God like that, why would anybody want to believe in him? He's terrible. He's a monster. Well, let's just see what's going on here. Were the Israelites killing thousands or hundreds of thousands of innocent people, or was something else going on here? God first had given them 420 years in which to turn to him, but they hadn't. Now that doesn't count the time that they had had Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob living with them. That spanned quite a period of time too. Abraham had rescued some of them back in the day when a group of kings from the east, from the area of Babylon, had come forward to attack them and carried many of them off. Well, he rescued them. And Isaac and Jacob, they had heard his stories. They had actually married into that family to a degree by their wives, some of their daughters marrying Esau and other members of his family, Jacob's brother. Instead, they went and worshiped false gods, even after seeing what, excuse me, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had done for them. They rejected him. The worship of these Canaanite gods involved prostitution as an official component of their religion. Their religions were crude, vulgar. They focused on sex and demon worship. Not a good start. Further, they practiced child sacrifice to Moloch and Baal, in which babies were placed in the arms of a bronze idol designed as a furnace and heated so hot. And they would play their music and drums very loud so as to drown out the screams of the child. That is just mind-bending. Now, archaeology and history tells us that Jericho in particular was known as a center of venereal disease. And so God did not want his people to interact with them at all for that purpose, just on the physical level. Even later in the time of Christ, the Roman Empire and Rome was known for that as well. It was a place you didn't want to go to visit, and you didn't want to interact with anybody any other way than just purchasing stuff and behaving yourself. It was a bad place to be in those days. The so-called cities that Joshua and the Israelites destroyed were almost all garrisons to guard against intruders such as the Israelites. They were not cities or villages as we think of them, which means that there were not many women and children in there. Now, the Canaanites were on that strip of land, and they had a lot of pressure coming from the east, from Babylon, Ur, and from the northeast, Haran down. Their big supply routes from Egypt to Babylon ran through that area. And so any ideas that there were good lands would get back to people in the east, and so they would be wanting to go in and see if they could help themselves to it. Now, also, these Canaanites had their back to the water. Literally, they couldn't retreat west against attacks because they had the Mediterranean Sea. And so now we have them, they've got this huge group of people that have been wandering around out there in the desert to the south of them for nearly 40 years. Wouldn't you think they would be watching them, and perhaps they had already heard, well, they knew about the Red Sea crossing, they knew about destruction of two of their kings that belong in their general group, Og and Sihon. They knew that history. And they probably couldn't figure out why this group of people kept going around in circles for almost 40 years, following that really weird cloud that was scary. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all if at least some of these garrisons were built specifically to keep the Israelites out. Finally, no one other than Jesus Christ is completely innocent. Everybody is a sinner. No one of us is innocent in the eyes of God. We're all rebels, all sinners, facing God's judgment unless we come to Christ for salvation. That's the only way. And the idea that there are innocent people, yeah, they are innocent people in terms of specific things that may happen to them. But overall being innocent, none of us are. And God, as righteous judge, and the one whom we have all rebelled against at one time in our lives, even after we've accepted him, we've said no to some things, he has full right to make judgment. But for us who stand in Christ as our Savior, he sees Christ when he looks at us, and such judgment is passed over. Now, next week, chapter 3, we're going to learn how several million people crossed a river without getting their feet wet. That's going to be interesting. See you then.